Welcome to qiphyedu. Today we'll be looking at Economics A2 level, paper 32, October-November 2023. Alright, let's start. Okay, so for the first question, it says the diagram shows the total utility of consumers Y and Z when each consumes bars of chocolate. And what is the difference in the marginal utility of consumers Y and Z when each consumes 4 bars of chocolate? Okay, so total utility is calculated by adding up all marginal utility for the number of bars of chocolate, in this case the number of bars of chocolate that you've eaten. For example, let's say you have eaten 3 bars of chocolate, so you add the marginal utility for the first bar of chocolate, second bar of chocolate, and also the third bar of chocolate. Alright, so I'm gonna write out all the total utility out in the table. Okay, so this one is for consumer Y, this one is for consumer Z. So if you look at the first bar of chocolate, which is this row, you can see that for consumer Y, the total utility is 40, whereas for Z, it's at 20. For the second bar of chocolate, you can see here, I'm just going to erase this one. You can see here that for the second bar of chocolate, for consumer Y is at 55, and then for consumer Z is at 40. For the third bar of chocolate, it's at 65, whereas for consumer Z is at 45. And lastly, for the fourth bar of chocolate, for the fourth bar of chocolate, the total utility of consumer Y is at 70, whereas for consumer Z it's at 40. Okay, so you need to remember that for marginal utility it's basically it can be calculated. Let's say if you want to calculate the marginal utility for the second bar of chocolate, it's basically the difference between the total utility of the first bar of chocolate and also the second bar of chocolate. So you can see here for Y, the marginal utility for the second bar for Y is actually 15, because 40 becomes 55, which means that you need to add 15 in order to get 55. And for Z, it added 20. For the third bar of chocolate, it's at 65, which means that if you take 65 and you subtract 55, you get 10. And then for Z, it's from 45 to 40, so that means it's 5. And then finally, for the marginal utility of the fourth bar of chocolate, since it's from 65 to 70 for consumer Y, it's at 5. And then for Z, it's negative 5. So the marginal utility when each consumes 4 bars of chocolate can be calculated by taking the marginal utility of the fourth bar of chocolate for consumers Y and Z. So if you take 5, and then so we need to calculate the marginal utility, the difference. So we need to take larger number and then we subtract it with a smaller number. So in this case, it's 5 minus negative 5. So you get 5 plus 5, and then you get 10. So the answer here would then have to be C. Alright. So for question 2, when choosing to buy 2 products, the satisfaction gained by the consumption of different combinations of these 2 products can be represented by an indifference curve. And which statement about such an indifference curve diagram is correct? So an indifference curve is basically the maximum combination of 2 goods that would provide equal utility to the consumer. Alright, so let's see which one is correct. It says the range of indifference curves show the combination of products a consumer can purchase with a given income. So the keyword here is not, there's no keyword here that mentions equal utility. Rather, it says given income. So if it's given income, that means that this can only be shown with a budget line, because a budget line is essentially what represents the maximum combination of 2 goods a consumer can buy with a given income and also the price of the 2 goods. But for indifference curve, it's equal utility. So here it doesn't mention that, rather it mentioned given income, therefore A is incorrect. For B, it says if an indifference curve is a downward sloping straight line, the principle of diminishing marginal utility must be operating. Now, an indifference curve is not a downward sloping straight line, it's actually a curve like this. So first of all, that is already incorrect. And second, it says the principle of diminishing marginal utility must be operating. So to say that the principle of diminishing marginal utility is operating is also incorrect in this case. Alright, so a principle of diminishing marginal utility is operating when you purchase subsequent bars of chocolate, and then let's say for example bars of chocolate, which is an example of food, and then the demand curve actually is downward sloping, then yes, the principle of diminishing marginal utility is operating. However, first of all, the issue with this answer is that it says that the indifference curve is a downward sloping straight line, which number one is not correct, and number two, that is the demand curve, means that this answer itself is not acceptable for this question because it's not correct. And C, it says indifference curves never cross because this means that the consumer will be indifferent between combination of two goods even when one combination provides more of each good. So yes, correct. Indifference curves will not cross. Okay, so if you look at something like this budget line here, you'll see that they do not cross. All right, and then for D, it says the gap between indifference curves is always constant, which is incorrect. If let's say the budget line is further away from the original budget line, for example, the new one is further away from the original one, then you get a different gap. If let's say the budget line is slightly lower than the original one, then the gap is also different. So D is incorrect because of this. Answer will be C, whereby indifference curves never cross. Question 3, negative externalities such as air pollution due to car emissions can cause damage to people's health in cities, and which response is most likely to occur from this situation? So negative externality is basically the cost that is borne by, say, the consumer and also the manufacturer. In this case, private costs, external costs, which results in social costs. All right. So A, it says car manufacturers will automatically bear any external costs, which is incorrect. The car manufacturers are the ones that resulted in car emissions, and they are the ones who are producing it. So the cost that they bear is actually the cost resulting from the production of this particular car, which is private cost. But external cost is basically the cost that is borne by the person using it and also the person surrounding that particular item, in this case a car, which means that people who actually inhaled in car emissions would then result in a deterioration to your health, and so that is basically resulting in external costs. And then when you combine external costs and private costs together, it resulted in social costs whereby everybody is bearing the cost. But then if it says car manufacturers will automatically bear any external costs, is incorrect. But if let's say the question says car manufacturers will bear private costs, that's correct. But external cost is borne by the citizens, people who are affected. B, it says market failure will be resolved when private cost equals external cost, which is incorrect. Private costs should not equal external costs. Market failure will be resolved when your marginal social benefit equals to your marginal social cost, then yes, that will be resolved. C, it says most people will decide to use buses rather than cars, which is not exactly the case, because most people will decide to use buses rather than cars. This is possible, but this is possible when there's nudge theory, when people will end up just switching to cars. If let's say buses cannot provide decent alternatives to car transport, then people will just end up using cars instead. So C is not really accurate. Let's look at D. Some form of government intervention to improve economic efficiency, which is correct. So the government can intervene by increasing tariffs on producing cars with normal internal combustion engines, ICE for short. So this would be better. The government would then have to intervene in order to reduce these negative externalities. C is less accurate, even though it's possible, but C is less accurate. All right. Okay, for question 4, the merger of two large firms in the Singapore market supplying taxis and private hire vehicles resulted in a single firm with 80% of the market. The remaining 20% of the market consisted of thousands of independent taxi drivers, and which statement best describes what has effectively occurred in the market structure? Okay, so the merger of two large firms, which can mean that oligopoly, then they merge, resulting in one firm. So one firm meaning monopoly with 80% market, and there's a remaining 20% of the market consisting of thousands of independent taxi drivers. Okay, so when we talk about oligopoly, monopoly, and all these things, right? This means that uh, the monopoly itself holds the highest market share in the entire market. So in this case here, you can see that it says two large firms. So these two firms actually hold the largest market share in the entire Singapore market. So what has happened here is that the oligopoly here has become a monopoly. So A says the market has become monopolistic competitive, which is incorrect. Because in order for the market to become monopolistic competitive, there should be a lot of firms, and then the products are homogeneous, right? But then you can see here it just says supplying taxis and private hire vehicles, which is basically the same thing. B says the market has changed from an oligopoly to a monopoly, which is correct. C says the market has changed from perfect competition to an oligopoly, which is incorrect because we already mentioned merger of two large firms, so it's not perfect competition anymore. And D says the market remains an oligopoly, which is incorrect because there's already one single firm with 80% of the market. Alright. Okay, for question 5, the diagram shows the cost and revenue curves of a profit maximizing, monopolistically competitive firm in long run equilibrium, and which statement correctly describes the performance of this firm. Okay, so you can see here, this firm is producing at a point where MC equals to MR. MC equals to MR is at a point where the firm wants to maximize their profits. If you look at the AC curve, you can see that it is touching the AR curve and at the same time touching the quantity that the firm is producing. So in this case, you can see here that that because of the fact that the AC here also equals to AR, that means that the even though the firm is producing at a point where they want to maximize their profit, however, because of the fact that the cost itself and the revenue is the same, that means that they are not making a loss, neither are they making abnormal profits. They're just making a normal profit, which means revenue minus cost equals to 0. Therefore, you can see here for the 4 options, A says it is allocatively efficient, which is not the point here. Alright, so because here we are talking about the performance here, which has to relate to abnormal, normal, or subnormal profits. B says it's making abnormal losses. It is making abnormal losses when the average cost is higher than your average revenue. Then yes, it will result in abnormal losses. C says it is making abnormal profits, which is incorrect because you can see the AC curve is touching the AR curve, and it's not below the AR curve, therefore it is not making abnormal profits, so the answer has to be D. It is making normal profits. Question 6. A firm changes its aim and chooses to produce where marginal revenue is 0 instead of where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and which explanation for this is not correct. So it is producing at a point where MI equals to 0, which means that the firm wants to maximize their revenue. Maximizing their revenue instead of actually maximizing their profits. Okay, so let's see which one is the answer. A says the firm wishes to increase sales, which is correct because if you produce at a point where MC equals to MR, we can refer to this graph here, then your quantity is lower. But if you produce at a point where MR equals to 0, you can produce way more. For example, here I've set Q1, so you can produce way more. B says the firm wishes to increase its output, which is correct because it does increase output, as you can see. And C says the firm wishes to reduce prices, which is also correct because you can see the price is now decreased if you were to produce at Q1. And then D says the firm wishes to gain more profits, which is incorrect. If the firm wishes to gain more profits, they will be producing at a point where MC equals to MR rather than producing at a point where MR equals to 0. Therefore, answer is D. Question 7. A firm operating in the airline industry uses third-degree price discrimination, and which condition is most likely to allow this to happen? Third-degree price discrimination is basically used when a firm wants to charge different prices to different groups of consumers for, let's say, services. Services here can include airplanes, ticket for trains, buses, and all those things under concessionary pricing. So you can see A, it says consumers are able to buy cheaply and then sell the product at a higher price, which is not the answer because this will not make third degree price discrimination possible. Like what I mentioned, it has to be a service, and this thing is an item, not a service, so A is not correct because of that. And the fact that the consumers are able to sell the product again means that it is not effective. B, it says price elasticity of demand is the same for all consumers in the market, which is incorrect. The price elasticity must be different for all consumers in the market, because some consumers, they treat it as a necessity, some treat it as something that they may use or may not use often. So there may be elastic demand for them. C, it says the firm faces a perfectly elastic demand curve, which is incorrect. Like what I mentioned, the price elasticity and demand is not the same for all consumers. So C and B is considered to be relatively similar in the way that the answer is question is asked. And D, it says the firm is able to keep the different market segments separate. For example, kids, disabled, elderly. So the answer is D. Question 8. What is not an example of a moral hazard? So A, it says people with a higher risk of unemployment are more likely to undertake training. This is not an example of moral hazard. We'll look into that why later. B, it says people with free dental care are less likely to take care of their teeth with good oral hygiene. This is an example of moral hazard because people who would be able to go to the dentist all the time would not really care about their teeth because they know that they can get it for free, so why bother? So in that case, right, it will actually harm the teeth even more. C, it says people in insurance against car theft are more likely to park their cars in high crime areas, which will result in more crimes, cars being stolen and all those, because for the fact that they know that there is insurance, they will then end up just using insurance to cover the loan of the car. D says people with unemployment benefits are less likely to undertake retraining if they become unemployed. It's also an example of moral hazard because people who actually are unemployed, they will be able to have benefits like if they have like insurance scheme and all those things to protect them from having no money for that month. So this is also an example of moral hazard. So coming back to A, where I mentioned that it's not an example of moral hazard, is because people who would be unemployed more, they will go and undertake training to ensure that they are not unemployed. So this is not an example of moral hazard because by undertaking training, their chances of being unemployed is lower, and also the fact that they're not harming themselves from doing so. In fact, they're benefiting them. So therefore, answer is A. Question 9. In recent years, the fuel cost of operating a jet aircraft has declined. Over the same period, improved design has led to much quieter aircraft. How will this affect the marginal private cost and the marginal external cost of air travel? So the fuel cost of operating a jet aircraft has declined, which means that the marginal private cost has decreased, or in this case, it means that the marginal private cost is experiencing a downward shift because the cost is now decreased, so it dropped. And then improved design has led to much quieter aircraft, which means less air sound pollution. Less sound pollution also means lower marginal external costs. So here we'll see which one is the answer. So 9, if you look at A, it says a downward shift of both the MTC and MAC curves. This is correct. Everything else is incorrect because you can see here for MAC it says movement left. Movement left meaning there's an increase in there's a movement left along the MAC curve, which marginal external cost will look something like this. Movement left would be something like this. It should be something like this, right? So that would be the best answer here would have to be a downward shift of both the MPC and the MAC curves. All right, so answer is A. And also the fact that the fuel cost of operating jet aircraft has declined, so meaning that the company will buy more of the fuel, and so that's why it is a downward shift, all right, instead of a movement. Question 10. Firm K operates in a competitive market. Firm L is a monopoly employer. Both firms are operating at equilibrium level output. Trade unions are introduced with the result that wages in each firm are increased. What is likely the effect on each firm if trade unions enter the labor market? Okay, so Firm K operates in a competitive market and trade unions are introduced. So for Firm K, employment will decrease, and for Firm L, employment will increase because first of all, for monopoly employer, they will they were actually higher at the point where MPP equals to MR, which is somewhere here. So when the wages are increased, they will have to hire more people in order to accommodate that. So that's why it's increased instead of decreased. This can be shown here, MPP equals to MR. They'll hire only until this point, but when the wages increase, they'll have to hire until this point. Alright, and then for firm K, it says it operates in a competitive market, so we can use the demand supply equilibrium. If the trade union actually increases wages, that means the demand for labor will decrease. Demand for labor decreases, meaning that employment will decrease. Therefore, answer is B because of this. Question 11, a backward sloping supply curve of labor is one where beyond a certain point, the supply of labor would what? So backward sloping supply curve would look something like this. Okay, so that means that beyond a certain point, the supply of labor would then have to decrease. Okay, when the decrease as your wages rise, because it's directly it is related like that. When your supply of labor actually increases, when it beyond a certain point, when your wage increases to a point where it's higher than what you need, then there will be lesser demand for labor. So answer is C. And then for question 12, what is the economic result of a universal basic income? So for universal basic income would result in a reduction in the incentive to work. So it would have to be a C or D. Does it improve equality? It does improve equality because people who cannot work will be able to receive a basic salary as well. Question 13, which combination of fiscal policy measures would be most effective in reducing income inequality? So the combination of fiscal policies that would be most effective in reducing this would have to be when you actually increase more of income tax for the higher income bracket instead of the lower income brackets. So C and D is out of the question because it says reduce. Indirect taxes have to reduce and the value of state benefits should increase. So answer for 13 is B. Question 14, at present, motorists who drive their cars within one area 1 of the map pay a daily congestion charge of $8. And which car journeys would decrease in number if the congestion charge area were extended to include area 2? So if let's say car journeys, if the congestion charge is extended to include area 2, at the moment it's only area 1, which is Z. So the number that will the car journeys that will decrease would have to be from an area that is not within the congestion charge zone to a point where it is entering the congestion charge zone. So in this case, right, X to Y supposedly is free, but then after there's a congestion charge in area 2, the car journeys will now decrease because people have to pay in order to get into the area. So it has to be from X to Y. Therefore, answer is B. Question 15. What is most likely to lead to an increase in the size of the national income? So in order to increase the size of national income, you have to increase your aggregate demand. So in order to increase aggregate demand, what you need to do is you need to, let's look at A. A, it says a fall in interest rates on savings account, which will increase expenditure, which is correct. B, it says a fall in the price of imported goods, which will result in a higher outflow money, so this is not correct. C says a decrease in government spending, which will result in less income, so it's incorrect. D says an increase in direct taxes, which will result in less purchasing of goods, so this is also not correct, so answer has to be A. Question 16, which government policy is most likely to improve occupational mobility? So A says decrease income tax rates, which is not correct. So here it says improve occupational mobility, so basically just improving on job changing and all those things. B says increase government spending on education and training, which is correct. C says increase government spending on infrastructure, that's accurate. D says increase subsidies to firms to employ school leavers, least correct. We're saying here is most likely, so most likely is when you improve training and education so that people who are more trained, more skilled to be able to enter the workforce, depending on which workforce they want to enter. Question 17, the table shows the marginal propensity to consume, marginal propensity to save, marginal real taxation, and marginal propensity to import for a 4-sector economy. And what is the size of multiplier? So to calculate the size of the multiplier, what you do is you take MPS plus MPT, not MRT, this one is wrong, and then MPM. So you add everything together and you divide it with 1. So MPS plus MPT plus MPM, you get 0.5. You take 1, you divide by 0.5, and then you get 2. So when you get 2, that's the answer. Size of multiplier is 2. Right. Question 18, what is likely to happen when the productive capacity of a free enterprise economy increases over a long period of time? So productive capacity meaning that you have space for more production. A, it says future generations will be less well off, which is incorrect. They will be more well off because of the productive capacity. B, it says increasing production of one good cannot be done without decreasing the production of another, which is incorrect. There is indeed Pareto optimality in this case. C says individuals will have more choices, which is correct. D says rising levels of output will cause per capita income to equalize, which is incorrect. Per capita incomes would increase, so answer has to be C. 19, the accelerator principle refers to a relationship between investment and it has to be GDP because of aggregate demand, so it has to be changes in GDP, so answer is B. Question 20, what is likely to be the effect of an increase in the budget deficit? So an increase in the budget deficit will result in an increase in your aggregate demand because now the government will have to spend on the infrastructure. That's why there's an increase in budget deficit. So A says an increase in effective demand, that is correct. B says an increase in unemployment is incorrect because demand increases, aggregate demand increases, meaning employment will also increase. C says a reduction in inflation, meaning that the aggregate demand will shift to the left, which AD curve will shift to the left, which is incorrect. D says a reduction in the volume of spending is also incorrect. Volume of spending has increased because of the increase in budget deficit, so answer is A. Okay, for question 21, the table gives details of the inflation and unemployment rates for different countries in 2008 and 2011, and which countries experienced a trade-off between their inflation and unemployment rates. So you can see here for Canada, the inflation rate is from 2.38 to 2.89, meaning that there's an increase in the inflation rate and also an increase in aggregate demand. For unemployment rate, you can see, however, it increases from 6.15 to 7.47, meaning there's no trade-off. For France, you can see that it's from 3.16 to 2.29, which means that there's a decrease in the inflation rate and an increase in aggregate demand. For unemployment rate, though, there's an increase, which is correct. That means that there's a trade-off. For Germany, the inflation rate is from 2.75 to 2.48, but then the unemployment rate is from 7.6 to 5.98, which means that despite the decreasing inflation rate, the unemployment rate decreases. So rather it should be for Germany it should be 2.75 to 2.48, which means that the aggregate demand decreases, so unemployment rate should be increasing as well. So there's no trade-off. But Japan is from 1.37 to negative 0.28, so that means the inflation rate has decreased. Therefore, unemployment rate also increases. So answer has to be France and Japan. So answer C. Question 22: which government policy would boost economic growth but not necessarily promote economic development? So which government policy will boost economic growth would have to be when if you look at the four options. A says creating a more equal distribution of income and wealth. This one is economic development, right? So to provide more income equality to people is part of development. B says diverting government spending from industry to education. This will promote economic development and also economic growth at the same time. C says encouraging the extraction of finite natural resources. This would improve economic growth but does not necessarily promote economic development because you are extracting items that are not renewable, which is not sustainable for the future. And then for D, it says introducing tighter controls on air pollution, which would boost economic growth, but it also improves economic development. Therefore, answer is C. Question 23. Which policy measure to encourage economic growth might be based on the concept of the Laffer curve? The Laffer curve is about direct taxes. It looks something like this. So if you reach a certain point where the tax rate is, when the tax rate is like this, is too high, then your tax income would then have to move this to the top. It would then have to decrease because people would now be less incentivized to work, and then they will pay less. So it has to be to encourage economic growth, which means to increase your GDP, you have to cut your direct taxes, which is A. Question 24. The exchange rate of an economy appreciates, assuming that the Marshall-Lerner condition holds in this economy. What is the likely outcome for imported inflation and unemployment? So an exchange rate of an economy appreciates. So imported inflation would now decrease, so C and D is not correct. Unemployment would actually rise because now the exchange rate appreciates, meaning that it's relatively cheaper to buy something from overseas. So answer is B. Question 25. Which characteristics are most commonly found in low-income countries? So the saving ratio will be low because people will save less. So B and D are out of the question. The capital output ratio is also low because the efficiency is lower in low-income countries. The capital that they have and the output that they have, the ratio itself is too low. For countries that are of a higher income, they'll be able to more efficiently use their resources, both capital and also the materials, to actually create a higher output. Alright. For question 26, what has not accompanied global economic growth over the last 25 years? So A, it says a depletion of non-renewable resources. This has indeed accompanied economic growth over the last 25 years. So this is not the answer. B, it says decrease in international trade, which is incorrect, because there is an increase in international trade with global economic growth happening. C, it says growing urbanization, which has accompanied global economic growth. And D, it says atmospheric pollution, which also accompany global economic growth. So the one that doesn't is B. Question 27. When assessing income distribution in economy, which change in the Gini coefficient suggests that a country is distributing its income more equally? So for this to happen, it has to move closer to 0. Gini coefficient should be 0. If it's 1, that means that it is completely income unequal. But if it's 0, that means its income equality has improved. So 27, it has to be B. Question 28. In 2021, a very large cargo ship carrying over 18,000 cargo containers blocked the Suez Canal for 7 days. It delayed over 350 other cargo ships, causing shortages of products in markets around the world as supplies were disrupted. And which consequence of globalization is best illustrated by this event? So it says cheaper products for consumers, which is incorrect because now there is a decrease in products available. B, it says greater choice, which is also not the answer. C, it says increased interdependence between countries, which is incorrect, which I'll explain later. D, it says increased migration of labours, which is not correct. So there's a reason why it's increased interdependence, because that means that you're relying on other countries for globalization, meaning that let's say you are producing this product, but then you need another product to produce this product, then you get it from another country. So this is interdependence. So the consequence of globalization is, if let's say you don't produce the product yourself, you end up having to get it from another country. But if let's say the other country has war, or let's say transport between these two countries is no longer possible, then it will result in a headache for you. But then for globalization, the advantages would be you'll be able to get cheaper products because the other country can produce it at a cheaper cost. You may have more options, and then you'll be able to increase migration of labor because people from this country can work in another country, so on and so forth. So answer is C. Okay, for question 29, the table shows data for Namibia and Spain from 2014 to 2017. What can be concluded about whether there has been an increase in economic growth and economic development in Namibia and Spain between 2014 and 2017? Alright, so let's look at economic growth. So economic growth here has to be an increase in real GDP per capita. So you can see for Namibia there's a drop, whereas for Spain there's an increase. So for economic growth it's Spain only. Alright, so it's either B or C. And then for health spending per capita, you can see that for Namibia there is a slight decrease, and for Spain there's also a slight decrease, but now we are assuming constant price levels. So that means that if it's real GDP per capita, that means that it is GDP that is adjusted for inflation. So GDP adjusted for inflation, this means that the price levels have adjusted. But then you can see here for health spending, it says assuming constant price levels. So it may or may not have economic development. So answer is C. Question 30, the graph shows the Human Development Index and its component parts for Zimbabwe between years 3 to 7, which components of HDI have comparable changes to its overall changes. So from 3 to 7, so something like this. So you can see here for the Human Development Index, it looks there's an increase. For Education Index, you can see that there is an increase from somewhere around 0.49 to 0.52 or 53. For life expectancy, you can see that there is an increase from 0.38 to 0.4, maybe 7. So there is a decent increase. But then if you look at GNI per capita, you can see that it dropped and then it slightly increased. So if you were to compare the components of HDI that have comparable changes to its overall changes, would have to be life expectancy and also education index. So the answer here would have to be C. Reason why GNI is not correct is because, like what I mentioned, you can see there's a drop instead of an increase, and only a slight increase from 0.45 to 0.47, something like that. All the others are all increasing instead of decreasing. So answer is C. Alright, so this is the end of this video. I hope you guys find this video helpful. Do share this video out to other people who may need help with economics A2 level. As always, I hope to see you guys again in the next video. Till then, this is qiphyedu. Goodbye.